So today I'm talking about Steven Wilson's remix of the 1977 Gentle Giant album, The Missing Piece. This came out March 29th. If you're watching this video, then I'm sure you know who Gentle Giant are, right? You know, their music is as intricate as anything from the prog rock era, but it's also defined by a surprising efficiency. You know, they never waste time or space. And they also have a tone of earthbound humility that's quite unlike many other top-tier prog bands. But The Missing Piece is often thought of as the point where Gentle Giant started to lose their way, right? Making an attempt to streamline their sound for greater appeal in a way which resulted both in a number of uninspiring pop songs that didn't bring them any closer to mainstream success, and paving the way for the follow-up Giant for a Day, generally regarded as their nadir. In the booklet for Wilson's remix of the Jethro Tull album Aqualung, he says that his job is the musical equivalent of cleaning the Sistine Chapel, right? And of course, you know, in remixing that album, in remixing Aqualung and the other Jethro Tulls from that period, he usually was very conservative about creating something that adhered very closely to the original vision of the work and the sound of the first mix. But this is not the Sistine Chapel, right? This is an album with a much more mixed reputation. And I was interested in seeing if that iffy reputation might actually lead him to take some risks with the sound that might unlock power or complexity that hadn't previously been heard. So today I wanted to compare the original mix to Wilson's new one, talk a little bit about the differences. I'll be using the copy from the compilation I Lost My Head. I don't have the 35th anniversary version, which does have a remaster that, you know, might sound a bit louder or softer than the one here, but it's the same mix in both cases. I'll also throw in my usual disclaimer, which is that I won't be addressing the surround sound mix of this album, partly because in practice when I listen to music, I'm usually listening to it in a setting where stereo is a better fit for me, and partly because the format of this video is, of course, based on clips, and, you know, you can't really sample surround sound in a YouTube video. As always, I'm Hans from Electric Brain, Electric Shadow. We are a contemporary art rock project that mingles aspects of progressive rock, post-rock, and post-punk. Check out a playlist of our best material linked in the description of this video, or find us on Bandcamp or Spotify. Now, in listening to this version, you know, Wilson has generally been quite respectful of the original. He's been very scrupulous about maintaining the same general sounds and instrumental balances. There are very few significant differences between the original version and this one. I was really only able to find one passage that sounded really drastically different, which I will play for you a bit later in the video. In general, Wilson's mixing and mastering here have resulted in something that is a bit quieter than the original, maybe a bit less reverbed. It also has a stronger bass presence, and I think that change does make it sound a little bit better at high volume, right? This isn't something that sounds as cranked at normal volume as the original version, but, you know, when you do turn it up, it does turn up better, feels a little bit less inflated. Listen to a couple pieces from the opening track, 2 Weeks in Spain, first from the original mix, then from Wilson's mix. Now, the bass is notably more present in Wilson's mix, but not even because it's louder so much as because the other instruments are a bit smaller and quieter. On the loud material here, you know, the original version feels a little bit thick and overstuffed. Looking at the file, it's been pushed up just below the point of distortion. It's basically maxed out. And Wilson's is quieter, but, you know, more balanced in a way that does feel a bit better and is notably easier on the ears. Just as an aside about the underlying material, you know, this song captures a lot of what makes this album both off-putting and actually underrated, which if you're waiting for me to say it, I will get to the underratedness in this video. You know, the one track, it has an energetic quality, it has an off-kilter feel. I think it's probably in an odd time signature, although it's even a little bit hard to tell where the one is in the measure to kind of tell that. It has an arrangement that does shift pretty dynamically as the song progresses. It's definitely not pedestrian pop, right? But at the same time, you know, it has this bubbly tone and the silly subject matter. And I think those make it a harder sell to fans of the conventional style than it has to be. Now, as far as the mix goes, you can hear some of the same things in the second track, I'm Turning Around, which has this very loud chorus that kind of blasts in the original and has a bit more restraint and texture in the remix. I find that clip partly interesting because of that echo effect where Shulman's voice says, "Turning around, round," which only happens that one time in the song. It sounds like it could either be the result of an echo effect that's just put in that one place for some reason, or maybe just sloppy double tracking. If it is indeed something that's generated by an effect, then it's kind of fascinating to me that Wilson went to the trouble of replicating that in the new mix. If it's a sloppy take in the double tracking, then it's very strange to see this particular band doing sloppy takes. I've always been kind of mystified by that moment. Now, the middle section of this album has some attempts at punk rock and pop that are some of the least successful material of their whole career. I do apologize to anyone who's partial to them. I'm sure they have their fans, because everything does, right? But Bet You Thought We Couldn't Do It, Who Do You Think You Are, Mountain Time. These are all songs that if any other band from that era had done them, I really wouldn't find appealing in any way, shape, or form. Let's listen to a clip of the first of those, Bet You Thought We Couldn't Do It.
I bet you thought we couldn't do it. And if we didn't try, I bet you thought we couldn't do it. And if we did, we would die. I bet you thought we couldn't do it. And if we didn't try, I bet you thought we couldn't do it. And if we did, we would die.
Now, that song is somewhat notorious, to the extent, I suppose, that any Gentle Giant could really be called notorious, for being a very simple driving rock song about how they're defying everyone's expectations by writing simple driving rock songs. The line, "If we didn't, we would die," registers as rather poignant now, right? Because they did it, and, then they died anyway shortly after. The best way I can describe the difference here really is just that the old mix of that song gives me a massive headache, and the new mix gives me a somewhat smaller headache. But I'm going to say something here that I think is really important that I have to admit I'd forgotten until I actually sat down to compare these two mixes side by side, which is that the second half of this album is really, really good. It's been maybe 5 years since I listened to it, as embarrassing as that is to say, and my impression of the first half was so overridingly bad that I had somehow forgotten that the second half sounds quite credibly like classic Gentle Giant. The song As Old As You're Young has some intricate medievalish riffing, a middle section with overlapping voices. The mix of the two doesn't really sound notably different that I was able to tell, but if nothing else, it was a good opportunity to rediscover how good the song is.
Out of the youth and you'll find that the time goes. Out of the youth and you'll find that the time goes. Stepping away, the changes when no. Out of the youth and you'll find that the time goes. Stepping away, and you'll find that the time goes.
Memories of Old Days is the epic of the album. 7 minutes of interlocking acoustic textures that I had somehow forgotten is one of the most beautiful things Gentle Giant ever did. In terms of the mixes, I actually have to admit that I'm a bit more partial to the original here. The quieter stuff does sound a bit better on the original mix in some places, and in this instance, Wilson's, what he's done is kind of buried some of the more interesting keyboard elements. And then the last two songs are intricate, dissonant rockers that really elegantly balance the desire to be a bit more accessible with all of the qualities that make classic Gentle Giant good. What's especially notable here is the a cappella song in the closing track, For Nobody, which is the only place I was able to find, maybe there are others that I missed, but the only place I was able to find where Wilson's mix is really dramatically different. Where the original is dominated by Derek Shulman's voice and has a strong phaser effect, the remixed version creates a much more organic feel and allows a lot of other voices to occupy equal space.
Nobody tells, everyone understands. It's anybody for nobody, anyone for everybody. I will be responsible for nobody. Nobody tells, everyone understands. It's anybody for nobody, anyone for everybody. I will be responsible for nobody.
So the moment of truth. How do I feel about this new mix? Well, I do like it a bit better, actually. You know, it's easier to listen to, it's got better low end, it makes the annoying parts of the album a bit less annoying. But other than that one moment in For Nobody, I don't know if I'd say it sheds any kind of drastically different or even slightly different light on the material, right? If your funds are limited and you're not interested in the surround sound version, maybe just listen to this on streaming. But I will say that if you've never given this album an in-depth listen, you know, if you just listened to it once or twice and wrote it off, then I really would recommend spending some time on the second half of it. Maybe even giving some of those iffy pop songs in the first half, you know, some quality attention. And, you know, if you're not familiar with this album, if you don't have a copy of it, if you've never really paid attention to it, I do think that this new master is a really nice way to approach it, and I'd certainly recommend it to anybody in that position. Thanks for your time. I'll see everybody next week.